update. All right, we're going to start with some quick introductions. So today we have Scott Helland. He is one of the co-chairs of the LAN Legislative Committee, and Susie, who is our other co-chair, and then myself, I am president-elect for the Literacy Action Network. And Scott and Susie, I don't know if you want to say hi and where you work, just introduce yourselves to people.
Scott Helland, Metro East Consortium, Harmony in Maplewood, North St. Paul, Go Maplewood, White Bear Lake, and Matamidi.
Susie Evans. I am representing South Washington County Schools and Hastings Public Schools. So that's the cities of Woodbury, Hastings, Cottage Grove, Newport, St. Paul Park, and a bit of Afton.
Awesome, thank you. And we are going to be joined a little bit later by the lobbyist for the Literacy Action Network as well. So you'll get to hear from a lot of different voices today. And thank you for putting the contact info in there. So a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about in this session. We're going to start by just giving a basic overview of LAN itself. I know for some of the people who are in this presentation, this is going to be very old information for you. But I also know that we've had a lot of turnover. We've got a lot of new faces joining us in adult education. And so we just want to make sure that everyone has the context of who we are. Then we're going to talk about the Legislative Committee specifically and what's been happening at the Capitol for adult education. And we will then talk about Day on the Hill, which was an event that happened in March, and talk about what's coming up, looking ahead. So starting off, what is LAN? LAN is the Literacy Action Network. And we do sort of three main big things. So our first goal is to foster statewide collaboration for adult education. And so part of that is communication, working with the Minnesota Department of Education to share out information, working across consortia to share information and keep people connected and updated. We also help with coordinating around that. You can sign up for our newsletter. So a plug for that, you can do that by going to our website. We recently redid the website, so it's been several months now, but if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's a lot friendlier. Sign up for the newsletter to stay in touch with what we're doing. We also do professional development. So in the past, we've done like the managers meeting in the fall. We're also, our big one is Summer Institute. We'll talk more about Summer Institute and how it connects to the bigger mission of the Literacy Action Network in a little bit, but if you haven't attended Summer Institute, please come. And if you have attended in the past, a reminder to you that this year we're going to be in person and we're going to be at a new venue. So we're really excited about that and hope to see people. And then the big other part of the Literacy Action Network is we do public policy advocacy, and that's going to be the big focus of this presentation today. So one of the things that we do is we have a lobbyist whose job it is to advocate for adult education at the state capitol. Many of you might be familiar with the fact that the vast majority of the funding for adult education in Minnesota comes from our state legislature. And so this is really important. It's key for all of our programs across the state that we have a presence at the Capitol, and that adult education is something that we are pushing for legislators to keep in mind as they create bills. The other part of public policy advocacy is speaking to legislators. That's something that Scott and Susie and the Legislative Committee do a lot of and are going to share what they've been up to with doing that. And then we also coordinate different advocacy events. So the big one that we just did was Day on the Hill. The Literacy Action Network has also in the past helped sites coordinate visits with their legislators. And one of the things that we'd like to encourage people to think about doing is inviting legislators to come to your sites as well. So you can go to them, but also they can come to you. Right now is not a great time because right now they're in the middle of drafting everything, but come fall, it would be a really great time for programs to reach out and classes to reach out and invite their legislators to check out what they're doing. So that's an overview of the Literacy Action Network as a whole. And yeah, thank you, Brad, for what you put in the chat. I'm gonna turn it over now to the Legislative Action Committee specifically. So something quickly with LAN, we've got a couple different committees. We've got our Summer Institute Committee. We've got our Marketing Committee, a volunteer committee. But we have a big chunk of what we do is through the Legislative Action Committee. And that's what Scott and Susie are chairs of. So I'm going to pass it over to them to share with you what the mission of the Legislative Action Committee is and what we've been up to.
So in the past year in this legislative session, there were kind of 3 points to our things that we wanted the legislature to take a look at. One of them was changing the $22 an hour cap to $30 an hour because it affects 1/4 of the state's consortium, and it definitely affects greater Minnesota in a big way, and it also affects how adult ed has a statewide presence, thus a grassroots presence. We appeal to all of Minnesota. So when that cap at $22 an hour for programs that have a harder time aggregating students affects them, it really keeps them from being able to meet the needs of students. So and it's been in effect since the 2000 or 2002, so 20 years, couple decades. So looking at that cap, also the subsidy for high school equivalency testing. So basically making either GED or HiSET tests first time around free. Both of those got into the House and Senate bills. The one that did not get into the House and Senate bills was the increasing ABE funding annually based on the percentage of increase that K-12 receives. So if K-12 gets a 2% bump, then ABE would get a 2% bump, but that wasn't the end of the story as often with the legislature. So at the start of that story, Sherry Munyon went ahead and she's the LAN lobbyist and set up for meetings with Chair Joachim, who is the head of the House Education Committee. So setting up an individual meeting with her and talking about the LAN needs and the ABE needs across the state. Setting up with talking with the committee chairs, Senator Kunesh. So eventually Sherry was able to loop back with Senator Kunesh after the funding annually based on the percentage of increase that K-12 receives was not put into the bill. That did get looped into there is definitely some in the Senate language ability for ABE to see that. Now, saying that all these things are in there means that the final result will be, we're not sure, but it does lean towards the fact that since it's in both the 22 to 30 and the GED and HiSET subsidies are in both the House, the Senate, and the governor's pieces, that bodes well for us, I should say. What will come down to can you clarify the cap? Does that mean the whole DOC is only earning $22 an hour funding? DOC would be based on only the contact hour rate. So that would not affect DOC. Just as in the metro, the cap doesn't really affect me. It affects folks that are in a larger geographic region. So the $22 cap is the combination of the usually school districts that have a ability to get the $1.73 per population aid, the LEP aid, the over 21 no adult diploma, and I might have said that wrong. Maybe it's over 20. I forget the clarity of the wording. And the contact hour funding. So those 4 pots combined equaling the 22-hour funding. Did that help, Rachel?
Scott, can I interject and just go back a little bit, and maybe Sherry can come on camera too? One of the most powerful pieces about working with LAN and what Scott won't Scott, believe it or not, might be too humble to talk about, but Scott was able to present in front of the committee. And Aaron, help me with his last name.
From CSD, Aaron Gutsky.
Yep, so he's the director of Think Self, our deaf and hard of hearing adult
Think
ed.
Self, not CSD, thank you.
Yep, and then Clarice is on this call too, and she was able to do some presenting as well. And
Clarice Grabau.
Yep, thank you. So the three of them presented, and I feel very strong, very passionately, very well spoken on behalf of all of adult education. And Scott, I just wanted to give you props for that because it takes a lot of time. And Sherry did a great job helping us prepare for the most impactful statements that we could make. And of course, students' stories are what tugs at the heartstrings of people. So thank you, Scott, for doing that, and Clarice, and if Aaron is on here. So that was commercial.
And Clarice had a relationship with the author of the bill for ABE in the House, because she had also worked alongside with running for political office in the Northfield area. So Clarice Grabau did a lot of legwork in teaching our representative who carried our bill forward. Sherry, you there yet? No. Oh, Clarice, can you come on and tell me the name of our bill author? Because
Yep, Sherry's here too.
Okay, my brain's freezing. Her name.
Christy Purcell.
Yep, that's exactly who I was trying to say. Thank you. So she carried our bill in the House. And then Senator Tu Zhang carried our bill in the Senate. He had carried our bill last year in the House, and then he's moved up to the Senate, and he carried it this year, and he is out of the district where my program resides. And he gave a powerful speech also on the Day of the Hill about talking about, growing up in the shadows of the Capitol, but coming from an immigrant family and talking about it from the perspective of many of our learners. I think that the ability, so Clarice, Aaron, and I were able to testify thanks to Sherry getting us on the dockets at the House bill, the Senate bill, and we're able to kind of get forth the message of adult education.
And Scott, there's a question from Angie in the chat.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that.
So is your estimate Angie says, is your estimate 1/4 of consortiums being affected by the cap based on the current number of consortiums who have reached the cap? Yes. It's not the prediction. So yes, it's based on the current ones that already have been there. It's almost 1/4. And I would state that would definitively grow were it not to be changed in this legislature, due to the fact that hours are not at this. Hours as we've talked about across the state, are at about 26% down, 74% of what they were currently pre-pandemic. So when hours go down, contact hour rates go up.
Scott, if I can interject, I was wondering if Sherry could come on just for a second. Sherry, I lovingly call you a stalker at the Capitol, but I was wondering, because you're kind of a mythical creature to a lot of people here, like you are the lobbyist, but could you come in and just do a 1 or 2 minute, like, this is really what I'm trying to do for adult education, and we're so thankful for you. So I know that you're not pretend, but could you put your camera on for a minute and just tell us a little bit about the life of a lobbyist and what you're doing on behalf of LAN?
Sure. I'm happy to, and then I'll take any questions people have regarding this during our event today. But I would just start that obviously you're all professionals working hard in your field, and you don't have the time to be at the Capitol every day, meeting with the legislative leadership and meeting with 30 to 40 committee members on the education committee. So I serve as the person who opens the door, introduces legislators to adult basic education, oftentimes, and specifically to LAN and the work you do and who you're representing. And, there's a process right before that, and Scott mentioned it. This is the LAN committee sets the legislative agenda first. So that's the first step, is having the legislative agenda to talk to legislators about. And one part of the process in setting the agenda is we usually arrange a meeting with staff and the commissioner or assistant commissioner over at the Department of Education. So in the summer, we actually start, or early fall, oftentimes working with the department to let them know what the upcoming issues are for adult basic education providers during that next biennium. And we ask the department to support your initiatives. And in some cases, we're still talking, and they're draft initiatives. And in some cases, like this year, they're holdover issues from last year. So they already know the issues. We just want them to know that we're still promoting them. And then the next step in the process is actually the Department of Education makes recommendations to the governor. That's why it's so important for us to meet with MDE. MDE makes recommendations to the governor, and eventually the governor puts out his or her proposal at the beginning of the year. So this year, it turned out that the governor had supported, two pieces of your legislative initiatives, but unfortunately, this year he did not promote the increase in funding and the growth factor for ABE. And that's why LAN's work at the Capitol is so critical. Without your organization up at the Capitol making the case, there would have been basically zero discussion on the needs of adult education and the role adult education plays for the state of Minnesota in your communities, for their families, for the economy, and our job creators. So we begin by meeting with the committee chairs. So that's step number one this year, was going in to visit with the committee chairs, telling them what we're doing, telling them who we're looking at for authors. Sometimes they like to give a little bit of guidance on authors. This year in particular, there were so many new legislators that committee chairs were trying to help out freshman legislators with bills to get them working in the process. And when we met with Representative Joachim, she had requested that we go visit with Representative Purcell. And we had a fabulous meeting with Representative Purcell. She couldn't have been more enthusiastic. And Representative Joachim didn't realize this at the time, but as Scott said, she had been campaigning during the election with Clarice. And so she had learned a lot about ABE, which made her enthusiastic to work with us. So that was very good news. Then we had to go back. Of course, sometimes this happens, not very often, and tell our planned author that we had a little bit of a change in why, and he totally understood, but still being supportive, he just asked that we put him as the second author. So we still maintained his support. Then we went over to the Senate side. We already had Senator Zhang as our author. As Scott said, he had worked on the bill before as a House member last year and wanted to continue that. And we met with the chair of the committee, Senator Kunish, and Senator Kunish was very supportive of him. We received great reception from the committee chairs on adult basic education. And when the testifiers from LAN were in front of the committee testimony went well. We received good feedback from committee members. So you can imagine the shock and dismay when the omnibus bills came out and neither one had ABE. There had been so much attention and so much focus on K-12. And I would add the K-12 teachers are so active in writing their legislators and promoting the needs in their community that when they crafted the bill, they left ABE out. I would say particularly Senator Kunish, but also Representative Joachim were disheartened in realizing they failed us, basically. And I think there is also as much education as we do sometimes misunderstanding by legislators about what these different pieces mean. On the House, I think they thought that increasing the cap, even though we had testified and met with them individually, they thought that it helped everybody. So the first response I was, well, you got the cap. And so it was like, okay, let me explain again. And we went through it again and let them know, that all the systems agreed on this as a part of the solution. But while there was funding increases for K-12, which would benefit the teachers, they failed to do the same thing for the ABE field across the board. Senator Kunish was aghast by what happened. It was an error. They had always planned to have your full proposal included in the bill. And the next stop for her bill after it was introduced was to go to the tax committee. That's not an appropriate place to make a change. But the stop after that was the finance committee. She included everything in her bill. So we're very happy to let you know that in the House bill, the growth factor and the increase to the base for ABE.
Sherry, that's the Senate bill, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Did I say
Yep,
it backwards?
you said
I'm
House.
sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the Senate bill. So the Senate bill, we'll be asking you to get involved and do some advocacy here over the next week. The Senate bill is what we are asking the conference committee to adopt. The House bill that does not have the growth factor and increase in base has passed off of the floor that way. The Senate bill has passed off of their floor with the whole package included. The next step is conference committee. So conference committee members have been appointed. Conference committees will be meeting next week. The K-12 conference committee date has not yet been set. I imagine by Monday, if not at the end of today, we'll see some notification of when their first meeting is. So the conference committee is a little bit of a different animal. Their job is to come up with one bill that will go back to the House and Senate for final adoption. We have two separate bills right now, so nothing can go to the governor until the House and Senate pass the exact same language and the exact same funding. So the House has appointed 5 members from their body that will negotiate, and the Senate has appointed 5 members from their body. These 10 individuals will sit down and work out the differences between the two bills, finding agreement. And then the final bill with all the K-12 and the ABE community ed provisions will go back to the House and Senate. They can't be amended when they go back to the floor of the House and Senate. They can either be adopted, passed, or they can be sent back to the committee. The Senate may see a bill come back with a provision they won't adopt and send it back. Committee has to work on it again till they have something that everybody supports. And then the final bill, once it's passed off the House and Senate floor, goes to the governor, and the governor will sign it, not sign it, or let it go into law without signing it is another option. In the case of the K-12 bill, we certainly would expect that it'll be signed. And he has support for ABE. It just didn't end up being one of his priorities this year, unfortunately. I do have the name of the 10 conference committee appointees, and I'll just read their names and their cities real quick, because these will be our targets over the next week. And it's imperative that individuals from their communities contact them and tell them how important it is to adopt the Senate provision. We want the senators to hear from you, even though it's in their bill. We want them to remain committed to holding tight and getting you that funding and growth factor. And for the House members, we want them to know that it's imperative for them to adopt that Senate provision for the work you do on behalf of your adult learners in the community. So in the Senate, the 5 committee members, there's 4 Democrats on each side and 1 Republican. This is how it splits out when you have the majority. And sometimes there's more Republicans and sometimes there's none. And the same is true when the majorities flip. If there is nobody from the minority party who supports the bill, then they usually aren't at the table for the negotiations because they didn't vote for the bill. In this case, there's a Republican on both the House Conference Committee and the Senate Conference Committee. So the Democrats in the Senate are Senator Kunish, and she's from New Brighton, and then Senator Swedzinski, who's out of Eden Prairie, Senator Gustafson, who's out of Vadnais Heights, Senator May Quaid, who's out of Apple Valley, and then Senator Duckworth out of Lakeville is the minority member. The House Conference Committee members are Representative Joachim, and she's representing the Hopkins area, Representative Hill, who represents Stillwater, Representative Pryor from Minnetonka, and Representative Clardy from Inver Grove Heights. And last, the minority representative is Representative Kaija from Little Falls. And Representative Kaija has been around a long time. He's been the committee chair in years past when the minority party was the majority party. So those are the 10 key members of the conference committee that will be meeting. As I said, we'll be asking for your individual advocacy, and we will also be preparing a letter from Literacy Action Network that can be shared with the conference committee, formal letter on letterhead. I will be attending all the conference committee meetings and speaking to those committee members to keep ABE in front of them. There usually isn't much opportunity to testify, but when there are major differences in the bill and people need more clarity, they might specifically ask for testimony. So it's a little bit different than a conference committee. You can't call the chairs and sign up to testify for your 2 or 3 minutes. You have to actually be asked to testify. So all the work will be done individually and by you with your emails to legislators. And you can certainly call rather than email. I strongly urge emails because my feeling is it helps create a longer term relationship with your legislator. You'll have their email, they'll have your email, you can write them in the future. As Kaija said, inviting them to your district is a fabulous idea, meeting them for coffee or at your ABE program, either way. And then you'll have your previous email. There's nothing better than when they get to know you, as was just demonstrated both by Scott in our getting his senator as an author and by Clarice in her working with her legislator and having a relationship. And others of you out there in the field very likely have met your legislator. Some of you may have only met them and not have a relationship. Some may have a stronger relationship. Some of you may have had the legislators to your school district. It would be outstanding if you would let Scott and Susie, Kaija know, so we have a list of legislators that we know have a relationship. I love to walk into a legislator's office and say, you know, Senator Uyghur, here I am, and you know where Scott Helland is too, that kind of a relationship, and remind them, it's important for them to be reminded that this isn't just a statewide issue, that it has local impact. And so many of your programs react and develop additional programming based on what your local needs are, whether it's nursing certificates, welding programs, etc. Those are great stories for me to tell at the Capitol. And legislators generally have no idea that you collaborate with workforce and with employers, et cetera. So that's kind of the picture of what we do at the Capitol. As I said, the next 10 days are really going to be focused on this conference committee work. The legislature adjourns May 22nd. That's a Monday. That's their constitutional deadline. They adjourn for the year, not for the biennium, but this year is the critical one because it's the budget setting for the next 2 years. Also, just to let you know, they can't do any business on the 22nd. So all the bills that are being passed this year, all the finance bills, will be sent to the governor before May 22nd. So with that, I think I'll stop and take any questions that you might have for me, Kaija. Turn it
Yeah,
back to
thank you. Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you to everyone who has testified in committees or anyone who's reached out to their legislators already. We did have a couple of questions in the chat.
If I could add one more thing, Kaija,
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I did want to say thank you for your work on Capitol Day. Having people at the Capitol is important. I know it's important to your students and to your teachers. It's also important to legislators. The one difficult thing is it's hard to get legislators into the rotunda. And I think from talking to folks as we plan, in the future, and Kaija said it had been done in the past, there'll be a little bit more of a focus on also helping individuals set up appointments with their legislators to meet with them one-on-one to advocate for our positions. Hopefully we won't have a lot to advocate for next year if we're successful this year, but it's still a part of that long-term relationship building.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you, Sherry. I think
Will LAN be sending a letter, email? So my question, Sherry, is at what point do we wish to have those emails flying out towards folks?
Next week, we'll want to get something out to your field at the beginning of next week.
And that will come from Wendy at LAN.
yeah. So if you're signed up, if you're a member of LAN, then you should be getting our emails. And you can also sign up to be on that list. I think the other question that we had in the chat was around statute 122A26. Did you see that question, Susie or Scott?
No. Okay, here we go. I'd like to know where LAN stands on 122A6 so prevents AB and from continuing contract rights because we don't meet the definition of a teacher.
Can you see that
Yeah.
question, Sherry?
Yeah, that bill has been included in the omnibus bill, but I believe it's in the omnibus labor bill and not in the omnibus education bill to include teachers, community education teachers. So ABE would be included as part of the contracts, can be included as a part of the contracts. It will be up to the school district to make that decision, as I understand it.
Yeah, and the odd thing about that bill, just in terms of thinking about ABE, is that we have a number of partners who are not school districts, so that pretty much doesn't cause any change in their worlds.
In my thank yous, I did not mention Brad and Jody. And I just want to let you all know that they work with us and they're very responsive when I need information, when we have questions. So they're also an important part of the work we're doing.
Yeah, I agreed on that. Do we have the omnibus bill number?
Yes.
Okay.
The two bills is Senate File 2674. And the other bill is House File 2497.
Thanks. All right. Any other questions for Scott or Susie or Sherry?
Thank you,
Okay.
Sherry, for your time.
Yeah, thank you. I want to throw out there too that if anyone's interested in being more involved in this work, we're always looking for more members on LAN, and you can reach out to Scott or Susie about being a part of the Legislative Action Committee, particularly if you want to be involved in those conversations about what goes into the platform for LAN each year. One thing before we finish up, I just want to highlight for everyone is we talked a little bit about the Adult Education Day on the Hill. This was an event that happened in March that we did in partnership with another ABE advocacy group, I Am ABE, and I think Chris Kloss is in this presentation as well. Chris is the main contact for I Am ABE. If you want to learn more about that, I'm also a member, but I'm wearing my LAN hat today. So for Day on the Hill, we invited programs, community members, people affected and a part of ABE to come to the Capitol. We booked the rotunda. We had tables to sort of show the different things that ABE encompasses, so people could walk around. We had students and programs doing tours of the Capitol so that students could learn more just about what happens at the Capitol and what they can do to advocate for things they care about, including adult education. And then we had the option for people to meet with legislators. As Sherry mentioned, that's a hard one for people to coordinate. One of the things that's challenging is that legislators often need sort of last minute flexibility to have meetings with them. So LAN is happy to help your programs do that if you're interested in meeting with your legislator, and we're going to keep exploring ways to facilitate that in the future. And then we had some fabulous speakers in the rotunda. We had the House and Senate representatives who were sponsoring our bills speak, and then we had some amazing student speakers, and we had a teacher in adult education speak, as well as a principal who had done ABE himself before becoming principal. So it was a really great event. I want to say thank you to everyone who was involved. And I also want to just throw out there that if you want to be a part of Day on the Hill in the future, we're going to start planning for that probably in November of this year. And we would love to have more people and more programs participate in this as a way to raise awareness. Like Sherry mentioned, people don't always know what adult education is, and you probably encounter this in your communities as well, where people just don't know what you do until you explain it. So the goal of this is to help raise the profile of adult education for the community and for legislators. I agree, Capitol Day, any day to see people. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just looking ahead. I want to encourage people to join the Literacy Action Network if you want to be more involved in these things. We have the Legislative Action Committee, but like I mentioned, we also have a bunch of other committees. If you're like, you know what, I don't know if I want to speak in front of a legislative committee, but I want to support the work that's happening here, please visit our website to see about what other committees you could be a part of, or just become a member. A lot of your consortia will give out money, or your program might pay for you to have a LAN membership. So look into that. If you're not sure, you can always email us to check. We really want to encourage you to reach out to your representatives, particularly right now, but also in the future. I think, as has been mentioned many times, building people's awareness about adult education is really important for us to continue to get funding. And learn more about adult education statewide. I know when I first started in ABE, my focus was sort of all on my classroom and my program. And I didn't understand all of the different parts that go into making Minnesota adult education what it is. So thanks for coming to this today. And if you aren't already exploring different options, there are a lot of cool ways to get connected. Scott or Susie, would you like to add anything else before we wrap up?
I'd like to just put a little piece on to what Kaija said about joining LAN. Just if you're talking to a manager, if you are a manager, just take a look at the pricing of Summer Institute. And if you become a LAN member, it may be just like Coles Bucks, a great way to both save yourself some money and join a wonderful organization.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thank you to Gail. She's putting a bunch of chat links in the chat right now. Our social media links, our website, also the Summer Institute link. One of the things that Summer Institute does is that by coming to Summer Institute, you help fund us having Sherry and having a lobbyist at the Capitol. We can't do that using grant money. So Summer Institute is a great way to connect with people across the state. It's a great way to build your professional development. And it also goes to help support the work that Literacy Action Network does. And yes, if you're a LAN member, you get a discount. Any final questions from people before we wrap up, or comments from anyone?
I just saw a question about changing, possible to change our legislative committee meeting so more teachers could join. So we will put that on our agenda for discussion too. Thank you for the question.
Right. If you have any other questions, or if you think of questions in the future, please reach out to any of us, and we're happy to connect. And thank you so much for joining us today.